For more on this, I'd like to welcome in political analyst and historian Rich Rubino. Rich, great to see you. A lot of projects to talk about here. I mean, Hannah just mentioned the Arch. We know about the ballroom, but let's focus in on the Trump Kennedy Center. We've seen multiple cancellations, even before the president's renaming. Do we know if this closure has anything to do with that, or is it all really about renovations?
We don't know. It's really all speculation right now. But obviously, Donald Trump was a very vitriolic personality. He's very controversial, very much polarizing. So consequently, people who do not like him, you would think that particularly those who are performers, and performers tend to be at least center left, would have reservations about performing there. But whether it's a direct result of that, we really don't know right now.
All right. So members of the Kennedy family are reacting. We know the president is getting pushback after saying that the building is in disrepair. NewsNation's Katie Pavlich spoke exclusively with the center's president. That is Rick Grinnell. I'd like to listen to some of what he said.
And I knew when I came here and I saw how decrepit this place was, how it was falling apart financially and physically. And so I wanted to show the President of the United States, who's also a great builder, the details. We went all the way down into the basement. He looked at the floor. He looked at the sewer system. He looked at the pipes. And he immediately was like, why is that floor so dirty? And it's never been cleaned, and that pipe is falling apart, and look at the soffits are falling. We had lawsuits. If you drive underneath the then Kennedy Center, the ceiling was falling on cars. We were having lawsuits.
So dangerous.
It was very dangerous. The place was falling apart, and people were telling us, tear it down and start over. I presented that to the president. We did a tour, and he said, I don't want to tear it down. Let's rebuild it.
All right, Rich, so we heard him describe it there at the beginning as decrepit. What more do we know about the current state of the building?
Well, I mean, that's certainly the master narrative, I think, that the Trump administration and certainly the Kennedy Center board are trying to effectuate or trying to convey. We really don't know. I mean, folks like Joyce Beatty, for example, the congressman from Ohio, Shelley Pingree, congresswoman rather from Maine, who is on the ranking Democrat on the subcommittee that is involved with the Kennedy Center, seems to be very much saying that this is not necessarily needed. I think that Donald Trump, one thing we can agree on is he's looking for a legacy, and part of that legacy is ethereal. And two things Donald Trump has always believed in. One of them is protective tariffs, and the other is in construction and in rebuilding and in certainly remodeling institutions. So I think he sees part of his physical legacy being the Kennedy Center, being the White House, and just being changing Washington in terms of not only the culture but also the physical structures of Washington.
And Rich, what more do we know at this point about the financing of all of this? You know, between the construction on the East Wing, that ballroom, this newly proposed Trump Kennedy Center renovations.
Well, we said that the president has indicated that this will be basically met with private donations, and will not really necessarily be something that will be public. But obviously, he has to raise that. He said he's raised certainly enough money to do that, and I think that that's basically what the president's argument here is, that it will not necessarily be from taxpayer money.
All right. So, Rich, the president also wants to build, Hannah just mentioned it there, a 250-foot tall arch in honor of America's 250th birthday. Its proposed size and scale, though, is alarming some architectural experts. The White House stands about 70 feet tall. The Lincoln Memorial, roughly 100 feet. So, again, this would be 250 feet tall. So the president wants to build, it would eclipse the arch there in India. What kind of reaction are you hearing to this, Rich?
Well, obviously, the president's supporters, the president's proponents, if you will, are very much supportive of this. His opponents, particularly the Democrats, I think are making an argument. I think you're going to hear this ad nauseum in the midterm elections. They're going to say essentially that at a time when America has an affordability crisis, the president is worrying about the architectural landscape of Washington, D.C. He's worrying about the White House ballroom. Basically, that he has that basically that he is living in a world that the American people are not living in. They will say that he comes from a very patrician background. He wants Washington to look a certain way when he should be focusing on, just like, by the way, when they talk about Democrats and some Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene are saying he tries to emphasize more foreign policy than domestic policy, but he's really playing into, I think, an argument that Democratic congressional candidates and Democrats who are currently in Congress or that are running for re-election are going to make. They're going to say that the Republican is a supporter of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is really more interested in the ethereal Washington than he is in trying to make their lives better.
And Rich, I know that there's so much that we just don't know yet, but what happens, or what would likely happen to these projects once Donald Trump is no longer president?
Well, I would think they would still be there, and I think that would be part of the legacy, just like Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt with the West Wing and the East Wing, just like President Truman with the renovations, the White House renovations, Gerald Ford with the White House outdoor White House swimming pool, or the Kennedy Rose Garden, or Bill Clinton with shutting off traffic on Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House. This is a legacy, and I think that Donald Trump looks to legacies, and he looks to kind of immortality, if you will. And this is something that will precede him, and that will succeed him rather when he exits stage left from the White House.
All right, political analyst and historian Rich Rubino, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, up next.